Mom, can I go down to the lake with Sarah and go out in the boat? No. Dad, can I have a BB gun like Billy Wagner got for Christmas last year for Christmas? No. Can we go down to the corner and hang out with those guys that we just met? No. But why? Because I said so. How many of you have ever, in your childhood, remember your mom or dad, when you asked them a question to go do something, the answer was, because I'm your dad or your mom, and because I said so. Anybody? A few. How many of you found yourselves then repeating that phrase to your own kids and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm your dad, I said so. Yes, yes. Well, honest confession, when I read Job 38, God's response to God feels a lot like, because I said so. I'm God, you're not. And it starts off with this, who is this that darkens my counsel with their words of knowledge? It quite literally in the Hebrew could be translated, who do you think you are to question me on how I'm doing my job as creator of the universe? But that's exactly what Job has been doing for 34 plus chapters of this book as he's sat on the ash heap. And for those of you who are just joining us for this series, so in the book of Job, it begins God and Satan going back and forth. God saying, have you considered my servant Job? And almost like two people playing chess back and forth, Satan says, yeah, but if you let me test him a little bit, his faith will fall like a house of cards. And God says, okay. And so Job goes through and he loses all his sheep and shepherd. They're all consumed in a terrible fire. His donkeys are all gone and either taken, stolen, or killed, as are all his farmhands. Same thing with his camels. So he's lost his job. He's lost his source of income. He's lost his livelihood. To make matters worse, Job gets a message that there's been a terrible tragedy, and not one, not two, but all 10 of his children, every one of his kids, has been killed in a tragic collapsing of the house that they were in for a celebration. Could you imagine? Then he says, well, at least I got my health. And we get to chapter 2, and Job gets all these boils and sores. He starts scraping them with a potsherd. And his friends, his boyhood friends, come to see him, and they say, is that Job? They don't even recognize it. That can't be him. Again, Job, not an Israelite. It takes place in a fictional place. There's no land of Uz in Israel or any ancient map. Some have tried to connect it to Edom, but this is really a story of legend. It's really a story that's made us to enter in or see our own suffering or pain as human beings in this story. Ironically, in the Hebrew, Job has been asking, where can I find God? Who will show me where I can meet with God? Because I'll be honest with you, Job says to his friends, normally I feel close to God, but in this series of tragedies, when my faith is being stretched thin, I know the psalmist in Psalm 139 says, you know where I sleep and where I lie down, even before a word is on my tongue. But I'm going east and west, north and south. I'm on my knees 24/7, and I don't hear or see or find God. So if I could just have my day in court, if Judge Wapner could be there and Doug Llewellyn's in the background and God could be the defendant and I'd bring my case, I know that God is good. And God would say, oh, you're right, Job. We made a mistake somewhere in here. We're going to make this all right. And the one thing that this book does is challenges the idea. I mean, let's reverse it. If everybody who did what was right or blameless, or the people who are quote-unquote good people trying to do everything right before God, if they were always blessed and everything always went well for good folks, and people who were kind of rotten and mean and nasty and ugly always got punished for that, there would be no book of Job. If life worked that black and white, good people get rewarded, bad people get wounded or hurt or punished. Yeah, if life worked that way, then it would all be simple, right? But Job says life's not like that. The Deuteronomist idea that if we just are obedient to God, we'll be blessed, and if we sin, God will curse us. it doesn't quite fit into a neat box that is life. Good people, people I care about, people I love, get hurt. And Job goes and pushes this really far. Because if you read in between these chapters of the lectionary, get to a place like chapter 9 of Job. Let me read a segment of that chapter for you. It is all one and the same, Job says. Therefore I say, he, meaning God, destroys both the blameless and the wicked together. When disaster brings sudden tragedy and death, he, God, mocks the calamity of the innocent. Whoa, Job. Are you saying that God doesn't really care when innocent people, men, women, and children, are hurt or mowed down in tragedy or genocide? Wow, if I was Job's friends and he's on the ash heap, I might take a step back just for a lightning strike possibility, right? Job, are you really asking these things? Basically, Job's saying, I'm not sure if God is fair. Wow. Don't see that in other books of the Bible. The earth is given into the hands of wicked men. God lets the eyes of judges be covered. And if it's not God, then who? Tell me who it is. Is God not all-powerful? And is God not all good? Then why am I in this mess? And why are others who may not have had the resources I have, innocent people, also in this mess? Do you ever ask these questions? Do you ever struggle with some of these questions? Do you ever feel guilty about asking some of these questions? Job's asking, who will show me God? And it's ironic, I said in the Hebrew, because God says, who is this that's talking to me? You want answers? You rub my lamp? You want to talk? Here I am. It's almost like that scene in A Few Good Men when Lieutenant McCaffrey, played by Tom Cruise, is after Colonel Jessup, and he says, I want answers. And Colonel Jessup says, you want answers? He says, I want the truth. He says, you can't handle the truth. That's what I feel like when we're in this whirlwind experience with God in chapters 38, 39, 40, and 41 of Job. And it's very paradoxical, if you'll stick with me for a moment. On the one hand, it's absolutely true. We're not God, right? And the poetry of this 4 chapters of the book of Job, God is talking to Job, and he's talking about, it basically takes Job on a tour of the cosmos. It says, were you there when I stretched out the universes? Crickets. Were you there when I determined the difference between the continents and the oceans and their depths and everything that lives in them? Job, you know how that works? No. And God continues to pepper Job with all these questions, and in so doing, it says, hey, this book started off with Job at the center of town. He's a respected man. People admire him. Nobody has anything bad to say about him. People care about him. And he is the center of his world. And he's measuring things by how they affect him, good or bad. And God says, now hang on a minute. Not everything in the universe revolves around you or around humanity. There's a great vast cosmos out there, and it's not all about human beings. There are things that you don't understand. There are things you think you understand that you don't understand. You're limited by space and time. You see time as linear. You measure things as good or bad because of your limits of time and space. I don't have those limits. Okay, I can get around that idea. God is God. Sometimes there's not an answer to why. Sometimes life just is messy. Anybody here ever had something rotten or terrible or painful happen to you in your life? Is that not part of being human? But on the other hand, part of me wants to join Job's plaintiff team. Because I say to myself, now wait a minute. In all this answer from Job to God, God doesn't actually answer any of Job's questions. Anything that Job actually asked God about, why did this happen to me? Why are my kids tragically killed? why is my wife telling me in great support to curse God and die? I always think Mrs. Job is very helpful and encouraging. Jeez, I might need counseling after this. But it's kind of a sidestepping of all those wise questions. And I think, wait a minute, Job has some legitimate questions. They're questions that you and I probably have, and sometimes ask or are afraid to ask of God. And the book doesn't answer those questions. And so part of me says, hey, I understand that you're God and Job isn't because I said so, but just like when I was a kid, because I said so sometimes doesn't feel very satisfactory. Just like it did when my mom or dad told me. Because I said so. Well, why? I want to know. The book doesn't give us that answer. And that's why, for me, I go through it a little bit chafed and say, well, but can't you give him one answer? Robert Frost, the old poet, writes in his postscript after reading the book of Job, Frost writes, God says, I'm going to tell Job why I tortured him and trust that it won't be adding or piling on to the torture. I was just showing off to the devil, as is set forth in chapters 1 and 2. And Job replies, 'Twas quite human of you. I expected more than I could understand, and what I get is almost less than I can understand. The Hasidic Rabbi Bunam, said, every human being, every man should carry 2 stones in their pocket. One should be inscribed with, I am but dust and ashes, in the grand scheme of things. But on the other should be inscribed, for my sake the world was created. And they should use each stone when needed. The book of Job leaves Job, as he's sitting there, his response, and we'll get to this in our final sermon on Job next week, but Job kind of has this reaction of hand over mouth, you're right. He's humbled by the scheme of, I'm so finite in this great big universe. You're right, God, you've got a lot on your plate. I understand I don't understand all the ins and outs of why things happen. I may never understand the ins and outs of why things happen. And then we'll find next week, does the interpretation then lead to a nice happy ending? Or is there something more in there that sometimes commentators gloss over or miss? How does this book end at Job and God and the wrestling of life's hard questions? One thing that I do know, even though honestly I'm not satisfied with the answers of God in the world, when God probably say, well, who are you? Who are you? Just like God says to Job in this tale, who are you to question me? Well, here's one thing I take away from this text that is very powerful. Job's ticked off at God. Job's faith is stretched. He's lost. Everything has been stripped away, and his worldview has been turned over. Everything that he thought he was in control of, when everything's been taken, he realizes just how much of an illusion of control that was. But he says, God, in my anger, in my questions, in my doubts, get down here and answer me. And God shows up. In the midst of the chaos of everything Job can't control. I think that's what that whirlwind symbolizes. You see this elsewhere in Scripture. Remember the disciples? They're in a boat. They're afraid they're going to die, these experienced fishermen. And where is Jesus? Walking on water in the heart of the storm. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Persecuted for their faith, they're tossed into a fiery furnace. Where does God show up? In the heart of the flames. To me, it says throughout the canon, we serve a God who might not always make life easy and neat and convenient and always making sense, but we We don't serve a God who says, I'm off on some cloud somewhere listening to harp music while people are suffering. No, we serve a God who, if Christ's ministry is any reflection of the heart and nature of God, who comes alongside and enters into human suffering and walks with us. Doesn't always make it all better, but leans to the arc always in Jesus' ministry, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, of trying to restore, trying to heal, trying to make whole. Again, that's not always on our timeline. But God doesn't say, Job, you hothead, you blowhard, forget you. I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to answer you. And even though I think the answers are unsatisfactory for me personally, when I read this book and I read this answer, I get angry. I get angry like Job. I want answers. The you can't handle the truth doesn't hit me well. But something happens. Job has maintained that God will be with him no matter what, even if that's all he's got left, along with the breath of life in his lungs, is God's presence. Job has never faltered on that. He believes in the goodness of God even when he can't see it. He believes God has him in God's hands no matter what. And God, in speaking to Job, even without answers to all of his questions, does something very powerful in this whirlwind narrative. It moves Job from a place of saying, I curse the day I was born. I wish I could just die because life is so unfair, so dark. I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And when God shows up and interacts with Job, whatever his reactions around those questions were, leads Job from a place of giving up and hopelessness to a, I'm ready to live again. You are my God. And this interaction with the divine has led him to a place of life. Answers? No. But a determination to not give up and to move forward, knowing that he's not walking alone, that this God who has seemed distant or unfindable, unknowable, has shown up, and he says, I've got you. Job says, yeah, I can move forward. Lastly, in the great words of one of my favorite theologians, Rocky Balboa, in Rocky 20 or whatever it was, old Rocky, not original Rocky, I mean old Sylvester and a lot of Botox. Let me tell you something you don't already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It can be a mean and nasty place. I don't care how tough you are, it can beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. Nobody, not you, not me, is going to hit harder than life. But it ain't, again, Rocky, but it ain't about how hard you hit. It's always about how hard you are hit and to keep moving forward. How much you take and can keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. All of us get knocked down in life at some point or another. And what Job maintains is, we're not alone on the canvas. There is a God who knows us by name, who meets us in our hurts, in the thin places of the unknown, and in our deepest pains, and says, I see you. I've got you. Let's move forward. What does Paul say? In my greatest weakness, my strength is God. I might not have enough to move forward, but God can carry me. May the God of peace, who when we look on the beach and look back, there's only one set of footprints, who carries us through sometimes hell on earth, be with you this day and always, especially in the questions that aren't necessarily satisfied in our answers. Amen.